welcome everybody. I'm quite excited to be hosting this webinar with Kristinia from Autodesk, and I look very much forward to talking about technology for AEC companies, and we'll focus quite a bit on information management today. So to kick things off, we are going to give you a bit of a rundown of who we are, what we do, and following this, I'd love to give you an overview of why we decided on this topic and the different areas it covers. So going all the way from building information modeling to the broad term of information management. Kristinia has prepared a great presentation on Autodesk efforts to support the AEC industries with a toolset that covers not only CAD, as you would expect, but information management on a project level and much, much more. Following this, we are going to talk about data, actually lots of data, and where it comes from and what can be done with it. So much for theory, because in all fairness, there's only so much theory anyone can bear, I guess. This is why the last two parts of today's webinar will be about practical applications. In addition to what Kristinia is going to show us, two more success stories and a Q&A with Rupert Goddard. So I don't want to hype him up too much, but he is a CDM legend with over 25 years of experience in this industry. So really great guest to have. We are going to introduce ourselves, our speakers, and we go with ladies first, I guess. So I'm handing over to Kristinia for the next slide.
Thank you, Yuri. Thanks for the introduction, and welcome to all the attendees to today's webinar. It's good afternoon. It's nice to have all of you over here. So, you know, before I start, I just want to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about Autodesk. However, I'm sure some of you might already have a certain level of familiarity with the company or the products that we have. So as for myself, my name is Kristinia Poluyanova. I am working at Autodesk right now. I actually recently changed the role as EMEA Product Marketing Manager within Autodesk Construction Solutions. So I am responsible for the go-to-market strategy of our cloud construction products in EMEA. Previously to that, I've been with Autodesk for almost 4 years, and previously to starting this role, I've spent all the time in the customer success team, making sure that, you know, the cloud solutions that we're offering for our contractors, owners, and other stakeholders involved in the construction lifecycle are successful, deploying those cloud solutions that work towards their project and company KPIs. And previously, you know, to join Autodesk, I've been working for a number of tech companies, both, you know, large companies as well as startups. As for Autodesk, for those of you who are not really familiar with the company was founded back in 1982 in the US, in San Rafael, California. It has this sort of a garage mentality as well, and you know, we are kind of a big company because we do have more than 11,000 people working worldwide, but we do have a startup mentality, and I think that's what makes Autodesk a little bit different from other large tech players. And of course, in terms of the product portfolio, it's really vast and different. So you know, we have products for construction industry, we have products for manufacturing like the you know, Fusion 360 shotgun, but we also have products for media and entertainment, which is our third sector. So things like Maya for movie making or movie production. And now I'll hand it back to Yuri, and I'll see you later.
Lovely, thank you so much. Well, my name is Yuri Weidenkeller. I'm very German, as the last name can tell. Fortunately, my parents decided to give me a weird first name, very Russian, so I keep confusing people. I'm the head of business development at IQ and IT, and my academic background is in renewable energy systems. So I worked with Autodesk as a student and during my internship. So when this topic popped up, I definitely wanted to get in touch. This is why we invited Kristinia to this session today. And my professional career started for a cybersecurity vendor American cybersecurity vendor that focuses on backhouse, business continuity, disaster recovery. And during my job back then, I was the account manager for IQ and IT. This gave me the opportunity to meet Kat, to meet Luke, our two founders. And although I only started working here about 3 months ago, I realistically been working with this company for over 2 years now, so we're quite familiar with each other, which gave us a nice little quick introduction rather than the normal half year or so it takes to get used to each other. IQ in IT itself provides technology success. We know that no business is the same as any other, but we also know that technology is crucial, that everybody needs technology, starting from very simple IT processes over to communications, over to internal optimization. And our mission as a service provider is to simply make it work. We want our clients to be able to focus on what they do best while we take care of the technology backend. Very simply put. So when we sat together to talk about a series of webinars for the AEC industries, many different ideas came up, like talking about success stories, and which we're going to do, or showing fancy videos of augmented reality setups, how to keep network sound and safe, or how to make the best use of specific tools like Microsoft 365, Revit, Zero. You pretty much name it. There are a million different vendors out there, and I'm really sure that we can fill an hour or two talking about just one product. And we potentially will have a look into this for future sessions. But what we realized when we spoke about this initially is that the centerpiece to all these different topics is data, right? It's all over the place, constantly produce more of it. And in the end, instead of narrowing down by topic, we decided to narrow it down to its origin and focus on methods to manage it. So before we paint the broader picture, the wider picture, let's start with a quick definition. So in order for us to be able to make use of information, data needs to be accurate, it needs to be complete, it needs to be validated. And there's absolutely no use for duplicates. And most importantly, data is great, having it is awesome, but you should be able to access it in a very secure way and whenever you need it, right? So as mentioned before, and as you can see on this slide, is data is produced, altered, processed by literally any activity. We're not going to focus too much on the areas on the right-hand side that I highlighted under digital transformation, mainly because it's very futuristic basically and would require a lot more time. So when I see this drones for progress capture, sounds awesome. I would love to have like digital pictures of construction sites all day long, but as long as people still manually copy and paste data from one Excel sheet to another, maybe there's a better starting point. So instead, let me just ask you, have you found yourself in a situation before where you just do these repetitive tasks in Microsoft Excel, like copy stuff from one sheet to another once a month or week, or when you use a CRM, have you updated company profile before and just forgot to link the right stakeholders? I know it's a bit more complex in big organizations. You have your partner success reps, you have your sales reps, you have SCRs, tech support, and all those things, right? And if they're not linked together, this data is just there, and you have to start from the get-go, basically. Or as one of my favorite topics, did you by any chance pay your sales rep too much, or even worse, not enough commission before, because your CRM and the accounting software just don't talk to each other, or the internal rule in the spreadsheet that worked just fine before? So as you can see, the list of data access points is close to endless, I'd say, because we will always need to be able to build reports. We will always need to know how much money we spend and what is missing before we can hand over a finished project. So we can distinguish between the project phase of construction endeavors, just to come back to the topic of today's webinar. And I'm sure Kristinia can and will explain that in more detail. And then there's also the organizational phase, where information management can offer additional benefits like price competitiveness, lowering the risk of incidents, compliance, and so on. So, I mean, I would love to use this opportunity to hand over to Kristinia now to talk about Autodesk take on this topic.
Thank you, Yuri. We can move on to the next slide. So before I start talking about anything or making any statements on the behalf of Autodesk, I just need to make sure that we show you the safe harbor statement, which basically means that we encourage you not to make any decisions based on the statements that we make as a company, because things may change as well as priorities. We can move on to the next slide now. So before I start talking about how Autodesk envisions the whole situation at the moment when it comes to data information, let's have a look at this this image. And this was actually a snapshot that was taken from the research that McKinsey made, and overall it just shows the complexity that is behind the construction industry overall. So obviously at the core of all this convergence is the data, and data nowadays, if you think about it, is really everywhere, and the generation of data and the information is exploding. That's what leads very often to data silos. So it isn't the rich 3D models that we create, or the sensors that the buildings operate with, or the images that we capture, the specs in products that we source, and the data that we really enter into quality and safety management tools. So in the end, you'll see that it spans across the entire project lifecycle. And if I am even more specific, about how the data is coming together and made usable, it's actually through BIM, or through building information modeling. So BIM is actually the foundation of digital transformation in our industry, and it's just a visual representation of an asset. So it is a process that in the end integrates the complete asset lifecycle on a unified one cloud platform. And this is, the essence behind making sure that all these points of information or data points are actually connected and linked through one system. We can go to the next slide now. Let's have a look, at the industry overall, at the industry, the trends, the pains that I'm sure a lot of you can relate with today. So we're all hearing pretty much the same things on a daily basis. We know that the demands on construction are higher than ever before, and we have even, seen this throughout the pandemic. That most of the construction projects they did move on with certain precautions and restrictions, but the industry didn't stop there. It continued to evolve. So over 200,000 people per day actually added to daily to urban areas. So cities are growing. We need to invest around $1 trillion annually to close infrastructure gaps as well. And if you look at numbers as well, you will see that 50% of contractors are concerned about finding experienced craftspeople. So there is still, also the gap when it comes to backfilling the certain roles and positions. 65% of construction demand is shifting to emerging countries as well. So there are certain, changes on a global scale as to where the industries are moving, geolocations and all those kind of things. 30% of global greenhouse emissions are attributable to buildings as well. So there is, a lot of pressure on construction and a lot of other industries that are also being impacted by construction. But when we're talking about technology, it is quite difficult for project teams to see beyond where they are actually sitting today. So again, if we look at numbers, more than 70% of the global construction industry is still working from traditional paper-based processes, and this is really, on a global scale. And I'm quite sure many of you can also relate with this. Construction productivity remains flat as well. So despite these huge investments, which are roughly $6 billion per year in construction software, and even in markets that are kind of beyond or setting the industry trends. So places like the UK, the Netherlands, the Benelux regions, where we see that we have certain mandates or certain mandates that the government tries to kind of push the industry to implement. Construction still trails in productivity improvements behind highly digitized industries like manufacturing. And the stats go on and on. We can continue this conversation forever. So the industry has to change in order to keep up with all these changes and demands. Next slide, please. The question here is, how can we actually turn this change into our own advantage or your own advantage? So how can companies, contractors, owners partner with technology providers while ensuring your success as a business and you are meeting and hitting your project and company KPIs and targets? Of course, I'll give an example. I'll talk about Autodesk, but I don't like to push too much our brand or positioning, but it's just the easiest example that I can provide since I come from Autodesk. So at Autodesk, we've been really focused on helping our customers thrive through areas of change since the beginning. So we've been trying to kind of lead the architecture and engineering professions from paper design to CAD. So the likes of AutoCAD and traditional desktop tools, helping the industry to evolve from 2D design to kind of rich data, 3D models and assets, driving innovation in manufacturing and applying that to fuel the convergence between manufacturing and construction, because this is also a kind of our theme throughout the past couple of years. How do we connect those industries? Because it seems like they are separate, but actually there is a lot of connectivity in processes. So how do we ensure the data also flows from construction to manufacturing and vice versa? And creating new opportunities like gamification of design, AR, VR, that are driven by the work we do in other sectors. And actually this is already not even tomorrow, it's actually happening today. The question is whether you are keeping up with the trend or whether you are a little bit behind. So today, very much we as a company focus a lot on construction. And this is, for example, why 3 years ago we've created a specific division within Autodesk, which is called Autodesk Construction Solutions, where I actually sit, that is focused on serving the needs of our construction customers. So because we notice that there are lots of changes in the industry. Those changes are rapid, and we need to react very, very quickly and help our customers react quickly. Our mission is really for companies, to help companies like yours to meet the world's rapidly expanding building and infrastructure needs, while also making construction more predictable, safe, and sustainable. Next slide, please. So in order to address this, we have identified kind of 3 key critical stages of technology adoption in order to get to a place where we can start to see productivity gains rather than gaps, like what we witness in manufacturing as a company. Successfully transforming the construction industry requires each firm to achieve these 3 key milestones, and we split them into digitizing, integrating and optimizing, that actually are on the same kind of part of the same cycle. So we don't look at them separately. Of course, it all starts with digitizing, and this is all about reimagining the construction business from the digital age. So it's not just about moving off the paper and going away from those paper-based 2D, 2D reviews with your design teams, although that's an important first step that not everybody has even made today. But it's also about enhancing the way the information is shared. So making sure that you are leveraging connected devices, you are leveraging different teams, whether that's your design team, your site team, or office and the field, and make sure that everybody, all stakeholders on the project, have access to the same information, the most updated versions of the drawings and files, and they can quickly raise an issue and then quickly respond to this. Second is, of course, workflow integration. It is about integrating business processes. It is about automating more manual workflows. And here we also speak about, bringing all the tools together. So it is important not just to have, one common data source of truth, but also to make sure that no matter what other tools you are using as a company, or no matter what other tools your stakeholders are using, there is a way to integrate those tools to make sure that all the information is connected. And finally, of course, when you are digitizing and capturing more critical information, when you are trying to work on integrating those pieces of data and information from different tools, we'll also talk about optimizing. This is like the actual goal that we want all companies to achieve, to make sure that they don't just put the information in one system and they can, share it between different project stakeholders, but they take it a step further by analyzing the data that's been captured, by analyzing the trends. And here we're talking about predictive analytics, which can help us to reduce risks on future projects and help us analyze overall project trends in order to understand how we can improve future projects and, make them safer, make them better, reduce costs associated with project works, etc., etc. Next slide, please. So Autodesk journey towards digitizing workflows actually started about 6 years ago, the actual journey itself. But most recently, it actually started to be kind of in the area of focus for the company 3 years ago, when we acquired several big competitors and decided to have one unified solution or provide one unified experience for customers. Our first strategy was to continue our investments in existing solutions, but also in our newly acquired products, because we know that it is also about the habits of people, and it's hard to make people switch from one platform to another. It's also about educating users and making sure they have the right value and understand what needs we're trying to help them solve. So whether it was, BIM 360 that maybe some of you are familiar with, or the likes of other tools, we are also continuing to invest in core functions of those products, in the same time developing this unified solution. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of how you could split that. So of course we have different tools that serve different needs, but then in the end all these tools sit on Autodesk Docs, which is the common data environment platform, which also helps users to achieve positive outcomes when it comes to version control, when it comes to naming conventions. So we try to make it also compliant with ISO 19650 and industry standards, especially here in the UK and Ireland, as well supported by Insight. And this is what I mentioned when I spoke before about optimizing. It's not just enough to make sure that everybody has access to the right data. It is about what you can do with this data. How can you analyze this data to make sure you are more successful with your future projects? And of course, on top of that, you have this administration, easy administration that allows project administrators or account administrators to quickly change certain settings and to make sure that right users are working on right modules and workflows. Next slide, please. Here then, if we look at the definition of the common data environment, you can see definitely that there has been a shift or a change. So on the left, we see the really simplified view of how team members typically exchange information on a project. And we know many of you deal with this reality even today, and actually, worked with quite many customers who you would think are quite advanced when it comes to digital maturity. But then, when you start conversations, this is actually what you would hear when you ask them, what is your definition of a common data environment in the company, the picture on the left-hand side. And it is a giant matrix, and it's hard to ensure that the right information is actually with the right person at the right point of time on the project. So often information lives with different systems and information exchange is manual. And of course that leads to errors because all of us are human beings. And then, but as we know, the further down the project timeline, the higher the cost of each error is, the higher the cost of your mistake is. So with a common data environment, the information flows through a central repository where ideally it is more easily controlled and is more up to date. And a common data environment should provide the mechanisms to gate information flow so that construction documents and other information such as markups or issues is really available when appropriate. And this is a rather simplistic view of a CDE concept that where we're trying to make this a reality. And this is on the right hand side, where you have different participants of the project lifecycle having access to the same database. Next slide, please. So this is, if you look at the previous slide or the CDE slide, this is how we look at it as a company, So we have this product in the middle, which is called Autodesk Construction Cloud, but can be really any other common data environment platform. And then the idea is that no matter where you sit in the project, whether you are responsible for, for the field whether you are a contractor, a subcontractor, you are doing project management, you are doing a site management, or maybe you are using an integration or a third-party application, a provider who is helping you with reality capture, maybe you're using HoloBuilder or some other tool. All this is in the end linking to the same system. And now, having said that, I will hand it back to Yuri.
That was quite a bit of information, Kristinia. Thank you. That was awesome to see, and definitely worth considering and exploring further. So we've also seen that there's quite a bit of overlap between just project phase and the organizational phases that follow, because as companies improve their internal processes, the information that was dedicated to only one project in the past, like very traditional ways, suddenly becomes extremely important to the process of finding a better way to do things, right? So there are more things to add to this, and of course there are, because even like stuff like regulations change every once in a while and influence the way companies work. It's not only construction, it's companies like ours are influenced by regulation changes as well. That's why I would love to break down the topic of data production and information management use cases down into 4 categories before we move on and talk about success stories, right? So in the first part, we'll talk about asset, project, and program management, followed by finance and controlling, and then we'll have a look at organizational planning and response, and my all-time favorite by the end of all of this, risk, audit, and compliance. So asset, project, and program management focuses on capital expenditure, delivery, OpEx expenditure, delivery, and the whole life costings activities, right? So CapEx is a one-off cost. You probably know this, but if you plan to build a house, big surprise, you need land, you need materials, you need tools, you need a workforce, and a bunch of other things. So the expenditure is spent at once, maybe paid at completion or handover or after every milestone, but there's no operational cost involved because this would count on operational expenditure. So the costs incurred as a result of the day-to-day operations of an asset. The new apartment block is managed. You look at the wages, gas, electricity bills, repairs, and admin expenses. So it's fair to say that some of them are quite predictable, like gas, electricity bills, and some others require historical data and just simply expertise, like the maintenance cost of a central heating system for a block with 16 apartments, let's say. The whole life costs include the previous two, but also take estimating disposal costs into account. So costs are generated much longer before and after the build is complete. The architect planning this or the the admin people approving stuff, they want to be paid, and it's before anyone has ever been on site to do anything. And just assume in 25, 30 years time, or even like in 10 years time, we would want to replace the building with shopping center, for example. You can add demolition costs to this as well. So on a project level, Kristinia already presented ways to make great use of information management. She spoke about the common data environment for secure access to the right information and how it can add great value, as we've seen. But once the asset is built, information management can be used to optimize operations by determining an operations and maintenance strategy with a global IAM concept that includes the supply chain. No business is the same, neither are projects, but nonetheless, a standardized information exchange facilitates and therefore accelerates the calculation and tracking of the whole life cycle costs. Here's the thing, right? I don't trust finance people. I never did, I likely never will, and in my previous job, I got into lots of arguments with them all the time. But nonetheless, finance and commercial operations are kind of essential, just to put it mildly. In terms of commercial management, you can use all the information accessible to you to standardize the tender document and documentation processes. This automates or at least semi-automates tender returns and definitely facilitates reporting. So for future projects, you can use the same information for the procurement of ops and maintenance services. And the last bit is, have you ever been in a situation where you asked for money for a project or additional resources that took you ages to build your business case, right? So IAM definitely might be able to help, as it allows you to build a central point for cross-project reference data, and you can even make use of current and historic CapEx and OpEx information in real time. So arguably the biggest asset to your projects are the people on site carrying out the projects, right? So it just comes naturally that any project plan involves incident management. It is the process of identifying, preventing, responding to, recording, and analyzing workplace health and safety risks. So as Katrina already touched base on, with the use of BIM, you can test out temporary logistics in response to incidents and ensure continuity in case something goes wrong. But if we want to actually work towards zero incidents projects, well, or what if we want to work towards zero incidents projects? Well, in that case, we can use 3D and 4D BIM data and models for example, virtual walkthroughs and more detailed investigations. Fun fact, by the way, the same applies to your IT infrastructure. So the goal is to prevent intrusions into your networks, right? But also plan for when they happen. IAM allows you to establish robust asset data at any level in your supply chain. That means this way you can develop and adopt models to counter disasters or at least work on a recovery. And I think that the key takeaways here are that business continuity and disaster recovery are not the same thing. While the first one focuses on going back to production as quickly as possible by failing over to a different sub-project, for example, or something else to work on, or the different ways to do things, disaster recovery is meant to fix the problem. Both need to happen at the same time. So as an example from the cloud services world, is our geo-redundant data centers. So when AWS, so Amazon's cloud offering goes down in London, for example, Netflix is still operational through channels in Ireland and Germany because they have extreme resiliency built in. So I guess we all love old-fashioned audits, don't we? Like some blokes in suits and ties and white helmets walking the construction site or through the office, taking notes, never smiling. Sounds like the absolute dream, I would assume, for everybody. Well, we could try and make it easier on us in the future. Just make use of intelligent information management, right? So when we look into environmental certifications like BREEAM, like SQL, that can give us or your business a competitive edge. They require tough audits, but by passing these audits to get certified requires quite few information that is somewhat of a tedious task. But some of those requirements and some of those assessments can be partially automated. So if you know that your standard projects require the same information, automate the extraction of this information and pre-build a report template. It'll save you valuable time to focus on something else. If you're really keen on performance optimization, you need to know not only how to measure performance, but also how to make use of that data. Once you have your key performance indicators in place, it's again time to fine-tune them and to automate the reporting on them. The last step is to make these reports accessible to all relevant teams and the team leaders. Kristinia mentioned this already. BIM offers great tools to automate the validation of compliance against design standards, and it's part of why companies actually adopt it in the first place. But you can also use it to review and mitigate health and safety risks to ensure compliance with construction, design, and management regulations. We will talk a bit more about it later with Rupert. But I think the key takeaway here is that certifications, standards, regulations require lots of data and lots of data preparation that can and should be automated, especially when working on standard projects. Cool. I know it must come as a big surprise that a guy working for an IT company is suddenly talking about data protection, but believe it or not, it is important. So look, we've spent some time discovering ways to make use of data, and there are many more ways to add to this list. We could probably fill the whole day just talking about data production and sending it back and forth and God knows what. So let's spend just a few sentences on protecting those assets for your and your employees' sake. In some shape or form, data holds intellectual property or personal information. And normally you don't want it to be stolen or encrypted. You also don't want it to be on sale on a dodgy dark web page. Unfortunately, the biggest threat to cyber resiliency is human error. It's only one email that makes it through the spam and phishing filters can cripple your IT infrastructure. Other problems are weak passwords and the lack of multi-factor authentication. So your employees should really know how to recognize a phishing email. They should use a password manager. They probably should not be allowed to bring too many external USB keys to work or plug in their external hard drive. And I know the pandemic was a bit weird in terms of where everybody's working and what everybody's doing. But if you have the chance and if you have the possibilities, just minimize, bring your own device utilization. These are quite a few very simple tips, but they can prove to be very, very effective. On the second note, patches are usually made available when a new vulnerability needs a fix, right? So Adobe is really good at popping up at least once a day telling you, hey, please upgrade me. And they do this because someone exploited or tried to exploit a vulnerability, and Adobe just fixed it. So make sure to apply patches. When Microsoft stops releasing new updates to their operating systems, like we've seen in the past with Windows XP, Windows 7, upgrade your systems to newer versions to prevent breaches. Because what happens otherwise is that there will be more and more vulnerabilities discovered by bad actors, and there's a good chance that Microsoft won't support you if someone tries to exploit them. So the third tip is that not everything needs to be accessible through the internet. Some resources are just fine for internal use, with remote workers using VPN to access it. And now that we know how beneficial data exchange can be, we also need to make sure they can't be intercepted, redirected, or somehow else hindered from reaching its secure destination. Once again, VPNs are really good at this. Otherwise, you can also just encrypt it in transit. And very last bit is that the last line of defense for your and your IT resiliency will always be a business continuity and disaster recovery strategy. So if a system goes down, whether it's just a work machine, just a normal desktop, or your server, or your cloud hosted servers, if it goes down, if it is encrypted, ensure that you can access your relevant systems through a second copy. If your leased line goes down, make sure you have a second one in place, or that you are able to fail over to 4G or 5G. The goal here should be to be up and running as quickly as possible. So yeah, on that note, if you have any questions, concerns, ideas that you want advice for help with, don't hesitate to ping me a quick message. I'll make sure to follow up as soon as possible, obviously after this webinar. It's great to know of some ideas, but it's even better to know that they actually work, isn't it? So Kristinia shared a couple of examples, and I would like to add 2 success stories to this. One is from Volker Wessels and one is from Ederoth. So just imagine that you could save up to 50K on every £1 million of project costs, simply because your field teams make fewer mistakes and have to rework less. Imagine you could add even more net profit to your bottom line by wasting less material. So Volker Wessels made that happen with the meeting information exchange app. It serves as a central information pool that allows senior execs to brief their teams, distribute relevant information, can be accessed on site from pretty much any mobile device. And I know what you're thinking, it's a broad statement. Of course, we're not talking about our first Nokia 3210, where we're more talking about like a normal tablet or a smartphone. And because the app highlights risks at any stage of the design process, it also helps to reduce errors and incidents. So field staff will ultimately spend less time on site and is better informed about what's going on around them. So the likelihood of incidents decreases. All in all, every £1 invested in the solution is expected to return about £6.90 over the next 5 standard projects. So I personally like the idea, not because I enjoy building apps or something, but because it's such a simple solution. It's the information that is being exchanged is already available. There's no additional resource needed to create new data streams or to put anything new into place. The app is just a method to distribute information properly and making sure that it reaches the right people. So Kristinia touched base on that earlier as well with the explanations about a common data environment, for example. So you really don't need to employ a bunch of developers and create your own app. The technology is there. It's just start using it. Second example is Ederoth. So they support the government's ambitions to provide more affordable and social housing, and naturally their projects are more price sensitive and cost optimization. But also social value played big roles in the evaluation of information management as one way to achieve their goals. So they also took this whole idea of IAM one step further and integrated across their manufacturing partners. So if you want to work with Ederoth, you need to meet their IAM requirements. That's kind of what Kristinia also explained on her last slide, where different parties involved have different systems to communicate with each other. And once again, clever information management can give you a competitive edge or put you in front of the right people. So for Ederoth, the combination of IAM and design for manufacture and assembly led to efficiency gains and time savings regarding the project delivery. So overall, these measures are expected to reduce delivery by 40% and save 6% of design and construction costs of their standard housing projects. So that's a lot of spare time, and that's a lot of less money that a standard housing project will hopefully cost. So less time on site also means shorter disruptions to surrounding neighborhoods, which adds social value to these projects. There's less noise, there's less pollution, there is less traffic jam because heavy machinery just disappears quicker. And on top of that, the use of thermal analysis improves carbon footprint of those builds and offers the first step towards a standardized energy efficient building model. So as with Volker Wessels, better planning will ultimately lead to fewer mistakes and avoid costs as well. We're pretty much done with the topics we had in mind. We can take a second now and just check if we have any questions. So, well, that's a nice one. So how do we make use of information management? That's a good one. So we're a relatively smallish company, right? IQ and IT, we're currently 12 people, and when I started, one of the first questions I had was, how do we generate interest in our company, right? So there's social media, for example. There is newsletters. There is networking opportunities in person over in the last year over Teams and stuff like this, right? So this information is somehow finding its way to us, but we started working out kind of a concept as to how to communicate with people that ask for the same information. So we just implement a standardized process to reply to inbound emails coming through our homepage, or when we have social media events like this, for example, we have like a welcoming email, and we have a follow-up email that every attendee receives, for example. So it's a small step, I admit, but I think it's a really good start, and it's a really good place to be in to have this possibility. Should we get into the fun part now? Let me introduce you to Rupert Goddard.
Hi there.
Hi. Rupert, welcome. Good to have you with us today, and definitely thanks for joining. How's everything? How's your day going so far?
Not too bad. Busy, very busy at the moment.
No, I definitely appreciate you taking the time to have a chat with us. And why don't you start by telling us about Goddard Consulting?
Okay, so yeah, Rupert Goddard. I'm one of the partners of Goddard Consulting, which was originally founded in 1995, right at the first set of CDM regulations when they came in as a firm of planning supervisors, which is a long outdated term, but essentially dealing with the health and safety of the design and management of construction. And it was came about as a result of an EU directive requiring the British government to bring in a set of legislation similar to the CDM regulations that set a framework by which construction was supposed to be designed and managed. And so as part of that, this role of a planning supervisor was created, and we were founded at the first set. And since then we started sort of very small, and we've grown all sort of organically, and there's now 16 of us in the company, and we've evolved through being CDM coordinators, and now our main function is something called principal designers, which is leading the health and safety of design and management in the construction industry on individual projects. And so that's what we do. We're specialists in that.
Nice. Yeah, that's definitely a new field for me. Probably should have spoke to you about this before, but how does a typical project look like then?
Oh, well, in terms of projects, we deal with all sorts of types and sizes. So we deal with so CDM regulation since 2015 now applies to all construction projects, but primarily we deal with it starts off at the very small end of things, sort of domestic scale loft conversions and extensions. But the largest things that we deal with, we have projects that are over £1 billion, and we deal with very large construction projects. So we will these days deal with almost anything. So shop fits, office fits, domestic, commercial, very specialist works as well. We do some very unusual specialist works, defense works. So there's very little we won't have a stab at now. We've been doing it long enough. We've seen most things.
Yeah, I guess we've been around for over 25 years. There's close to nothing that can shock you anymore, is there?
No, not really. We reckon we've seen it. Every now and again, something comes up that's new, but it's not it's not frequent.
Very nice. What resources do you have to work on these projects? I mean, obviously your team of 16 people, but is there anything particular that we wouldn't necessarily expect for you to use?
Not really. I mean, in terms of IT, I suppose I mean, we're by comparison to the presentations that you've given so far, we're quite low tech, really, in that we're a relatively small business, and although we are moving, towards more technology, and we're particularly since the pandemic, we have had to upgrade our IT systems in order to be able to facilitate working from home. But primarily our consultants work from either laptops, desktops in the office. We have iPads that we use on site, so when we go to construction sites to fill out reporting. But yeah, relatively low tech.
Yeah, no, that would have been my next question to ask. Like, when you go on site, well, what do you have in place? How do you communicate with your clients? What do they expect from you? And have you seen kind of a change over the last, well, let's take COVID, obviously, but also before, let's say, the last 5 years or so?
And I mean, most of it's the modern world, really, isn't it? I mean, originally, I mean, construction
it is what it is.
Fundamentally is quite a backward, or it's a lot of it is quite a backward industry, in that I think a lot of the industry is still done face to face. There's still, until the start of the pandemic, most design team meetings took place in somebody's office. It's relatively recently that we've been doing things online, and primarily since the pandemic. And I think that will be a change, and I think it would be a good change going forward if more design team meetings and things like this are held online. But primarily our communication is face to face, speaking to people quite a lot, but also email. I mean, that side of it, really.
Fair. Yeah. Nice. Okay.
Not much in the way of sort of WhatsApp or other apps.
Well, we'll see how this is going to change over once we're allowed to go back to like more or less the new normal, right? So yeah, let's switch a little bit over to, I know you must have worked with other support companies in the past. You must have dealt with lots of technology vendors, I would assume. I mean, we get about 20 calls a day from someone trying to sell us something. What's your experience in the IT world? How has it been before you started with IQ and IT? How has it been since?
It's been very good since. Since before, we've used a variety. We probably had 4 or 5 IT providers over the years, and generally speaking, the experience that we've had has been good. But we've tended to want to deal with relatively smaller companies where you can have a much more personal relationship with the people that you're dealing with, and that is what I particularly like about dealing with IQ and IT, is that we can pick up the phone and deal with things, and it is less about fulfilling tickets and the sort of, it is in fact what we're generally looking for in an IT service is a sort of personal ability to be able to pick up a phone and get things fixed. Previously, that tends to have been where things have gone wrong, is where either IT companies have expanded and then you have lost that sort of more personal ability to deal with people, and that's often why we've ended up changing suppliers.
Right. Okay. I think
is that standard.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. I think one of the bigger challenges that small businesses have is finding the right method to scale up, and it's definitely not only a problem in the IT industry. I think if you don't put the right processes in place before you scale up, it's just tricky to reverse engineer them, right? So you can't suddenly go back to, how do I actually manage a team of 20 people when you haven't started learning how to manage a team of 5 people, or having for us, very simply put, if we suddenly had 40 engineers, we'll need to come up with new ways to distribute queues, for example. Very, very simple explanation. So yeah, it's tricky, and definitely one of the many things on our to-do list as well. Just trying to figure out how to scale up, and this is why I love talking to our existing partners. This is why I also appreciate you joining us here, because I just enjoy getting this feedback and trying to understand how we can do a better job. So on that note, if there was one thing that we could do better,
Oh,
what
to
would
be
that
perfectly
be?
honest with you, I have been very happy with the services. I'm not just saying that because I'm on it. There's nothing particularly that you could do better. It's very good. What we like, and as I say, one of the things when coming up with scaling up, which it has definitely been a problem with other people previously, is people who know the system and understanding how we're set up, so that you're not having to re-explain everything that's gone before to somebody else who's dealing with that. Now, if you're dealing with a relatively small team who seem to all know our system, then that's very well. But if you have 50 engineers, and then somebody sort of jumps on and then they have no idea how we're set up or how it works, and then you have to explain all the nuances of how we're set up. Yeah, that's how it's dealt with.
It's a bit of a tricky bit. I mean, there are two approaches to that, I guess. Is one hand making well, having a proper documentation process in place, big surprise. But there's also, it's a bit of a controversy for, at least in the IT world, is whether you tier it by front, second, third line, potentially fourth line support, and have every customer or every technician be responsible for every customer, or if you develop the same structure but have smaller teams focus on the same clients over and over again. And I personally, I never was in a position where I had to implement it or even think it through properly, but by the sounds of it, I definitely prefer the second option. Just have the same people talk to the same clients, talk to the same partners. And
it'd be interesting coming back to our company. When we try and get, we always try and get, because of that nuances. If we deal with a firm of architects, we will try to get the same consultants to deal with the same people, so that you end up with that understanding of nuance and how it works.
No, 100%. Yeah. Once you get used to my German accent, you probably never want to leave either, right? So kind of get the point there. Right. So, I mean, how did you like the session today?
Very good, very interesting. I think it does make me realise how low tech we are by comparison to the Autodesk setup. But there we go.
Well, I think that's a topic for another day, but I'm really sure Kristina's taking notes right now. So
it is a world that we are ultimately going to have to get into, because particularly things like health and safety files, which is our sort of output document, is something that will increasingly get built into BIM. I mean, it's not something that we particularly have to deal with at the moment, but I can see it looming on the horizon that we will need to get involved in that at some point.
So,
I think it will also depend in many cases on your stakeholders, right? Because sometimes it's a little bit harder to try and digitize something if other stakeholders are not on the same page. So normally it has to be driven. I mean, if we're speaking about construction life cycle, quite often it helps if the contractor kind of tries to drive this. If they're using some sort of a solution already, then the rest of the team will probably see the benefits on the construction phase, and then they can implement it further down the project life cycle. If it starts at design phase with a design firm, then you start seeing the benefits that you're getting at this design or coordination phase, and then the likelihood that you will implement something later on in construction is also higher. And also I agree with you that it's good to stick to one technology partner, especially if your network is quite broad, or at least try to, if you can stick to one technology partner, which is not always possible, try to work on those integrations and try to create those links so that your information is connected and you avoid the data silos. And maybe one more advice that I could give, or that what I've seen customers do, is that it's hard very often to drive the change for the entire company or across the entire company. So choose one project where you can start or pilot this change, And then it's also easier if you can prove the success on one project to justify the investment as well for other projects.
I think that's a bit that's probably missing in today's session, but is because I didn't know how much time we have, or how quickly I go through my slides and stuff. But you can always dream big, right? But the beauty of any optimization process is you can break it down to whatever level you want. You can start with whole company, like you said, which probably the worst thing you can possibly do, is split down by sectors within your organization, split down by teams within your organization, and almost break it down to individuals as well, through the use of KPIs, through the use of data is accessible anyway. So it's in our planning session so far, what I've experienced, we just sit down and start dreaming and start painting things almost, where we come up with centralized idea and then figure out ways, or figure out things that play into this idea, and allocate the right resources, find out the time frame, and it suddenly becomes a project. So yeah, it's good fun.
One of the issues that we often find actually is that we're rarely the ones driving the technology that is being used. So it is normally led by the architect from the outset, and the architect is setting, or the lead, normally the architect, but possibly also the project manager, is setting the framework of the technology that's being used. And so then we then have to buy into that process also, whether it's, you know, Dropbox or Econex or you know, various other Procore, these various other systems that you can then use to be able to do this, and we end up having to using that. And it's funny you mentioned with the contractors, because often the process is set long before you've got the contractor on board, and it's often, it would be, you know, useful to get the sort of, I think, embedded earlier on in the design process, and then the contractor is buying into the process as well, that's already set up and is already running.
Yeah, no, totally. Sounds like a supply chain problem, right? on a very wide scale. Right. Do you have any questions for us?
Do I have any? No.
Perfect. One last from me then probably is, would you like to mention anything before we just wrap things up?
Well, actually, I suppose one thing that I can see, if you're not aware of, or if people aren't aware of, is that when the building safety bill comes in, and that is going to change with the golden thread information that we will be required to keep on large-scale residential projects, I can see that this level of integration becoming much more important, and being able to hold information much more clearly for much longer periods than is often the case at the moment.
Brilliant. That's an excellent piece of information. Thank you.
There you go.
Appreciate it. Nice. So one last slide. Let's do this. Cool. My boss doesn't know it yet, but I like to finish things off with promotions. So, and right now it feels like the right thing to do as well. I would love to offer a 1-hour consulting session, basically with IQ and IT, either over Teams or in person. And in an ideal world, I would love to use this, well, information to build a report, right, highlighting potential inefficiencies, and use it as a draft roadmap, if you will. So simply give us a ring on the number that you currently see on the page, or even easier, visit our website. You can schedule a session with me through the button in the top right corner, the one that says schedule online. I know it looks like I used Microsoft Paint to draw this beautiful red circle around it, but rest assured that I did not. It was already part of this presentation deck. So the last two things that I want to say is thank you, Kristinia, for all the great work that you put into this presentation. It was incredible, like, and very spontaneous as well. I know I've been asking for a lot, and you over-delivered almost, so appreciate your help. And Rupert, Rupert, it's been a pleasure as always. So I look forward to seeing you in the office soon, I guess. And yeah, thanks everybody for your time, and look forward to hearing from you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.